telling us something. One morning, a father and his young son were in the woods hunting rabbits. After about an hour, they finally came across some rabbit tracks. In between the tracks, there was these little round brown pellets. And the son said to his father, "Dad, what are those?" His father replied, "Those are smart pills. Try a couple." So the boy reached down, grabbed a couple of them, put them in his mouth, and the boy made this funny face and said to his father, "They taste awful." And the father replied, "See, you're getting smarter already." I thought I'd start off with a joke because Don was always telling a joke. If you knew Don more than 2 minutes, you probably heard one of his silly jokes that he had. And he'd always get that. The thing that I will picture every time I think of him is that ordinary smirk that he'd get on his face every time he'd see you, because he was about ready to either to tell you a joke or play a joke on you or do something to you that maybe it'd tick you off for a couple minutes, but then you'd remember, you know what, that's just Don's sense of humor, and you just got to get over it. One of the earliest stories that I remember of my dad telling me about Don was when Don was around 5 years old. Mom and Dad, which is Martha and Edgar, are my grandparents, and Gary and Don lived in Kenmore at the time. And Grandma and Grandpa Smith, which is my great-grandparents and Grandpa Smith's parents, lived on 23rd Street, which happens to be the house that Grandpa grew up in, and then eventually my mom and Dad bought and I grew up in, so 4 generations lived in that house. Well, one day, Don got in his head that he wanted to go to Grandma and Grandpa Smith's house in Barberton. Now, this was 5 miles from Kenmore, and Don was only around 5 years old. So Don hops on this 20-inch bike with no training wheels and headed over to Grandma and Grandpa Smith's house. Well, he was over there spending the day with Grandma and Grandpa Smith, and eventually Martha and Edgar and Gary were thinking, "Where's Don?" And they couldn't find him anywhere, and they're looking all over for him, and all of a sudden Martha remembers, he said something earlier today about going over to Grandma and Grandpa. So here she calls up Grandma Smith, and she's telling her how they couldn't find Don. They've been looking for him everywhere. Well, in the meantime, Uncle Don's listening to this on the phone, and he's thinking, "Oh, man, am I in trouble?" So he hops on his bike, and if you're familiar with 23rd Street in Barberton, he heads down 23rd Street and heads down Shannon Hill. I rode my bike down Shannon Hill many times, and man, that's a steep hill. You could really get some speed going. Well, here's a 5-year-old kid on a 20-inch bike. He's going down Shannon Hill. He falls off the bike, and he scrapes his chest completely up. So you can imagine this 5-year-old kid with this, I'm being very kind and saying it was scraped up. It was worse. The descriptions are terrible that Dad gave me. But here he is, jumps back on his bike, bawling and crying and pedaling back home, knowing how in trouble he was and trying to get home. Now, Dad can't remember if he made it all the way home or if they picked him up, but I guess the story always reminded me of Don's determination from a young age that if he wanted to do something, he would just do it. And he didn't really think about it. He just did it. Now, another humorous story that my dad said that really reminded him of Don is just Don's orneriness. Dad remembers Don the day that he lost his glasses. Dad and Don were 16 and 13, around that age, and Dad's 3 years older. One day, Don came home, and he was missing his glasses. He told Dad, his cousin Kenny Smith, and Jack Mitchell that about 3 guys jumped him in the alley in Kenmore, beat him up, and took his glasses. So they all jumped on their bikes and went chasing after these 3 guys to get his glasses back. Well, they couldn't find the guys. Well, Dad said about a week later, him and Bob Swain, who ended up becoming an Akron police officer, were at Johnny's beverage shop buying some pops. And Well, the owner come up to him and said, "Do you guys know of anybody who lost their glasses?" Well, Dad said, "Well, yeah, my brother did." Well, the owner asked him for the address, and Dad gives it to him. Well, Dad goes home right away and says, "Hey, Don, guess what? We found your glasses." And Don says, "What?" He says, "Yeah, the owner of Johnny's up there says he found your glasses, and he told him I gave him your address." I'm being kind here, and Don tells Dad, "Well, you dummy," with a few choice words. He says, "Well, here's what happened, Gary." And he told Dad that what happened was Don was in Johnny's store, and he tried to lift a couple bottles of beer. Well, the owner came around the corner and grabbed him by the arm, and Don wriggled loose because, he was a scrapper, He just wriggled loose and ran out the door. Well, he lost his glasses in the meantime. Well, Dad said, "You better tell Grandpa because you know what you got coming to you." And, well, I remember so many times when Dale and I were kids that we'd go out in the front yard at our house, or we're over at his house, or, Grandma and Grandpa's everywhere. We were always wrestling with Uncle Don. And when we started getting older, if we ever started to get the slightest edge on him, well, Don played to win. He didn't play any other way. He'd start pinching you and doing all these different things because he'd do anything he could to win. He didn't care. He didn't want to be showed up, especially by us. Don was always a huge jokester. He was always scaring his kids. I remember going over and babysitting for, Dale and Sarah. And before we'd be going, Don would be teasing them or scaring them. Or if I spent the night, or us, whenever we were over there as kids, he'd always be scaring us or playing little practical jokes on us. And I think if all of us sat here for a minute, if we've known him for any length of time, we could think of at least a few jokes that he told us or a few pranks that he played on us. And again, every time he'd do it, he'd get that smirk that I'll always remember. Uncle Don would always take Dale and Sarah fishing. And one of the spots that he would almost always take them to is behind Village Inn. Well, behind Village Inn is Lake Dorothy, and that was PPG property. Well, so to begin with, Don didn't have an AA pass to get back there, so he was sneaking back the railroad tracks and taking the kids back there fishing. And Sarah remembers one time in particular where she's fishing and she goes to cast out her rod, and, well, the line went back and the rod went forward, and, well, the hook went back and got Don in the air, and she yanked forward, and Dale had to come over there and snip the line and pull the hook out of his ear. And there was just so many times it's even hard to begin to describe how many times he would go out and take Dale and Sarah fishing, or me, and I spent so many wonderful times with him. I remember when I was a teenager, like 17, 18, 19, and Don and Mary had gotten divorced, and Mary had moved down to Florida and with the kids, and I'd go over to Don's apartment over there by Edgewood Park, and every Tuesday night was product night for Amway, and I'd help him get all the orders ready to ship out and all that, and we'd go fishing and hunting, and me and him loved going down to West Virginia and going fishing, or down to Ohio Power, different things, and just spending so much time together. How about this? Can anybody guess how many cars Don owned in his life? I don't know how many times he would call up, and I know he called every one of you, or most of you, saying how good of a deal he got in this car, and it had 160,000 miles on it. And if you knew Don, you knew that he was a true salesman. I know Dale and Sarah and I always talked that he was always a good finagler. He was, and whether it was for work or for things that he was wanted, he was always trying to work some deal. He could trade you, whatever. He'd always have something that you wanted, and you always had something that he wanted. And he knew how to trade you or how to get you to give that thing up. And sometimes, Dale was saying one day he traded, like 3 or 4 different things to finally get, with different people to finally get to the one thing that he really wanted. And he could probably trade a pile of poop to a fly. He was just that good. Well, Don had been through so many things. In some ways, it's really hard to believe that his body gave up. But in other ways, it's kind of believable because he just put it through so much. He had broken through so many bones, been through countless accidents and battles in the hospital. And even when he was in a cast up to his leg, he'd climbing up in a deer stand, hunting deer with a cast up to his leg, or in the blizzard, or when he wasn't supposed to be out there this last fall getting his last deer. He was fighting through any sickness that he had because he just did that. He fought through everything. There are several things that I've learned in my life from Uncle Don. And I hope that I can apply these the rest of my life, and maybe each one of us can too. The very first thing I learned that I can think of now is don't be a stranger. Uncle Don and I, as probably many of you sitting here, we talk several times a week. Him and I talk so much, as I know he did with many of you. Sometimes, most of the time we'd be sitting there and we just started a movie and there's Uncle Don on the phone and I'd be like, oh, we just started a movie. Then I'd get in the conversation. I'd just forget all about it. But many times it was either he was driving from somewhere, going to somewhere else late at night, or been on the road forever, or I was on the road from work. But he always tried to maintain, either by phone or driving to see you, the relationship with his family and friends. And I tell you, if you are not in the habit of staying in touch with your family, you need to get off your keister and please be determined to get in touch with people in your family. Stay in contact with them. Don't go a week without calling them. Be there for them. Most of us here are family, and we have to make sure that we are here for each other. I'm here to tell you that I appreciated talking to Don every couple of days, and I will really miss talking to him. And I'll really miss that when he first answered the phone. Hey, Matt, Don here. And when he got off the phone, bye now. You never know when the last time you will get the chance to talk to your family member or spend time with them. And if you read any bit of the Bible, you will see a common theme is how much importance God places on the family. So please, do like Don did and don't let any moss grow on that stone, and spend time with your family. A second lesson that I learned from Don is to help others. Don was always the type of person who took time to help other people. It didn't matter how many hours in the week he worked, and he worked so many hours going helping the sportsmen fighting for their rights and raising money to help them, one of his passions. But in between that, if you needed help, I had a hot water tank go out, and he came over and helped me, and then we couldn't solder it right, and Dad called Dad up, and he came over and helped us get our solder right. But Don was always doing something to help other people, always, and he was always there. So please, learn that lesson. Be there for other people. The third thing that I learned from Don is to enjoy the things you like to do. Don loved to shoot, hunt, fish, camp, and spend time with his friends. Well, and that's what Don did. Do you have things that you'd like to do? Well, take some of your time and do them, but include other people. Don always made sure that he included other people when he did things, whether it was kids or nephew or whoever, friends, close friends. He was always doing things, but doing them with other people. Many of my fondest memories have been spent with Uncle Don, either duck hunting, deer hunting, shooting down at Millie's farm, fishing in West Virginia or Ohio Power, whatever. The name is countless as it is with all of you. And the fourth thing that I learned by Uncle Don, not necessarily from him, and I wish I would have learned it from him, is to take care of yourself. This is one area that I learned, especially now, the grave importance from Don. The problem is Don did not take time to do this. Don worked so hard, did so many things, and spent so much time on the road, and helped so many other people that he did not take time to keep his health up. We can't control the accidents that we're in or the inherited defects or whatever it may be, cancer that may come upon us, but we can control the things that we can control. If we're having trouble to stop smoking, please put it in your mind to do so. If you're having, if you need to eat healthier, do it. If you need to, whatever it is, we all sitting here love each other, and we need to do what is in our power to try to do that. One scripture that really brings hope to me is a promise that Christ gave us in Revelation. Christ's revelation about the time that after his second coming. It's in Revelation 7:13. And it says here that one of the elders answered to me, saying, "These who are clothed in white robes are they, and where have they come from?" And I said to him, "My Lord, you know." And he answered to me, "These are the ones that come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. And they will hunger no longer, nor thirst no more, nor will the sun beat down on them or any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them into springs of water of life. And God will wipe away every tear from their eye." And I know that one day that God has promised in his resurrections that we will have every tear wiped away, and the sorrows of this earth will be gone. Well, as Don would do, I'm going to sit down after I say one last joke. It was Saturday morning as Bill, an avid hunter, woke up ready to go bag the first deer of the season. He walks down to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and to his surprise, he finds his wife Betty sitting there, fully dressed in camouflage. Bill asked her, "What are you up to?" And Betty smiles and replied, "I'm going hunting with you." Bill, though he had many reservations about this, reluctantly decided to take her along. Later, they arrived at the hunting site. Bill sets his wife safely up into the tree stand and tells her, "If you see a deer, take careful aim on it, and I'll come running as soon as I hear the shot." Bill walks away with a smile on his face, knowing that Betty could bag an elephant, couldn't bag an elephant, much less than a deer. But not 10 minutes pass by when he is startled and he hears an array of gunshots. Quickly, he starts running back. As he gets closer to her stand, he hears Betty screaming, "Get away from my deer! Get away from my deer!" Confused, he races faster towards the screaming wife, and again he hears her yell, "Get away from my deer!" followed by another volley of gunfire. Within sight of where he had left his wife, he is surprised to see a man standing there with his arms high in the air. The man, obviously distraught, says, "Okay, lady, okay, you can just have your deer. Just let me get my saddle off of it."